We really hadn't experienced anything like that in North America. And in Canada, we are our own little bubble.
For me, so give me an example of challenging up and an example of empowering down.
We have 85,000 kids. We have 13,000 staff and 138 schools. People need to feel empowered in their local context, their school community, to be able to make the decision that's going to be best suited in that context. Now, the flip side to that is, so I can set the vision saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to bring out the resources for you. But I also need to be able to hear coming back up through the system, through the staff, is that if we're way off base.
What is the respectful and appropriate way to challenge up?
Could happen in many ways. I'll give you a really direct one.
Mark Pearmain, president of the British Columbia School Superintendents Association and superintendent of Surrey Schools, leads one of Canada's largest and most diverse districts with a student-first, values-driven approach that blends executive governance experience with a challenge-up, empower-down philosophy to build transparent cultures and advance equitable outcomes.
Mark, you said that a hill you're willing to die on is to not make decisions in a vacuum, to step out of the tyranny of the urgent and look at the big picture. Teach that as a tool. So if I'm a leader and my day is on fire, what is this actual method?
I think as a leader, you have a choice. You have a choice of how you're going to lead. And the easy way is to control. The harder way is to distribute. Well, the first thing I would say to anybody in formal or informal leadership roles is that
Mark, can you drop us into a moment where leadership got real for you really fast? Where were you? Who was with you? And what was at stake?
Well, I can think of two, actually. One was an informal leadership role. So I was a 6-year teacher in September of 2001 on 9/11. I was History 12 and a History 12 teacher. And I remember, obviously, on the West Coast here, that was before school started and right before classes started. And I had 90 students in my classroom asking me what the hell was going on. And their world was literally rocked. And I just remember in that moment of feeling woefully unprepared as a 30-year-old, pretty new teacher. And also at that moment in time thinking, these kids need someone there to kind of be calm and collected and give perspective and hold space. And I needed to step in. And so there's a little saying that I have, which is, you just need to kind of take that 20 seconds or 30 seconds or 10 seconds of courage to jump forward. We follow that certainly in British Columbia when it comes to Indigenous education. And back in the day, it was like, okay, take 5 seconds of courage, step into the conversation, hold the space, and the kids will drive it from there.
What was the first thing you heard that made you realize that that was going to be such a hard moment?
I think if I think back to that day, there was so much disbelief and worry. And I'd been at the school for a number of years at that point in time. So I had what I would say would be some reputational capital with the kids. I also had grown up with these kids in the sense that I taught them when they were in grade 8, and some of them were coming through into grade 12. Or I taught their siblings, so I'd seen them around, and you could just sense that kind of bewilderment and in some circumstances fear in their voice. And at that point, there is that space where you really just feel compelled. I think many in education go in because we want to serve other people, and that was a moment of servitude to go in and serve the kids. By being a trusted adult and a safe space to be raw in their wonderment and, frankly speaking, I think in their worry of what was happening.
What did you feel was the consequence if things didn't go as planned?
I think that for that time, we really hadn't experienced anything like that in North America, and in Canada, we are our own little bubble. And um, kids had read things in history books. They might have watched videos of what took place in World War II or in the Vietnam War or Afghanistan or whatever they had seen, but this was suddenly hitting home. And I just go back to that space of, I think for many, suddenly North America was maybe wasn't as safe as what they thought. And there was the wonderment of, well, could that happen here? And that idyllic world that they had built around them cracked a little bit, like it did for all of us in that moment. And again, that was a space of, if I didn't step in, or if I didn't maybe take that leadership role, um, you know, what would happen for those kids? And again, it's often the old adage: if not you, then who? Right? And I was there at that moment. Those kids had come to that classroom that I taught in and I worked in. I guess they felt that was a safe space for them, and so I needed to make sure that that safe space was going to what was going to provide for them in that moment and then what they needed.
3, 2, 1.
Mark, your grounding quote came from Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until it's done. Where has that been true in your leadership, not as inspiration, but as a lived experience?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. I think what's interesting is that when you start in a teaching career, for many of us, it was right out of university. And in my case, I was literally just turned 24, and very, I would suggest, young. Had some life experience, but not a lot. And then you're put into that position of working with students who aren't that much younger than you, and at the same point in time, you're the adult in that room. And so I just remember those first weeks of school, um, you know, self-doubt, questioning, really, can I actually do this? Like, I know I've gone through 4 years of education and then a fifth year for my teaching degree, but there's still that uh, self-doubt in the back of your head and in your mind every time you step in front of the kids. And again, it's that space of just believing in yourself and having that courage to step forward. I think at the same point in time, having a modicum of humbleness to recognize you really don't know everything, and you're going to learn a lot, as much as the kids are, over those first number of years in the classroom. And then away you go. And that feeling of learning together and learning from the kids at that point in time, who were literally giving direct feedback every moment of every class, kind of stuck with me all the way through. And it's taken me from being a History 12 and Social Studies 8 teacher at Kitsilano Secondary School to now, the superintendent of the Surrey School District in British Columbia. And it's not lost on me of that kind of seminal lesson that I learned to embrace it and move forward with it.
So, speaking of the transition from teacher to superintendent and all the roles that would have been in between that, there's always going to be a creeping feeling at some point of, can I do this? Is this possible? What are those first moves you take that shrink that impossible feeling?
Well, the first thing I would say to anybody in formal or informal leadership roles is that, in my perspective, my opinion, the best leaders are those that distribute leadership opportunities. If you try and do it all on your own, I think A, you're going to be miserable, and B, you're going to burn yourself out. And so for me, I learned the lesson of distributed leadership on the basketball court when I was a high school kid. and then tried to model that as I was a coach, and has just literally taken that same mentality all the way through. If you think of a high functioning team, it doesn't matter if it's a sports team or a senior executive team. What happens is that you get a group of people that have a common goal that will check their egos for the betterment of the whole. And there's a spoken and or unspoken recognition that you're only as strong as collectively than you are trying to be individually. And so I just, that mantra has stuck with me all the way through. And as you alluded to, I started as a teacher and then a department head and vice principal and worked my way up. But the concept's the same, regardless of if you're the superintendent CEO or if you're leading your kids in a classroom. If you distribute it, it's a much, much easier role and frankly, much more rewarding in the long term.
That also applies to roles outside of the education world, right? It's corporate, it's business management,
Everything.
anywhere that you need to be. If you can do it
Yeah.
as a team and you can put your collective mindset together,
Yep.
the wisdom that could be in that room is significantly greater than if it's just coming from an individual. And with that, in our intake form, you indicated that you're guided by respect, integrity, collaboration, and communication. In a pressure moment, which one of these becomes your anchor? And walk me through what you lean on most when things do become difficult.
Well, in a pressure moment, what you hope you have accumulated is reputational integrity and lots of collaboration in the bank. Because there are going to be many moments in any leadership journey that we're going to be high pressure. And regardless of the decision that you make, someone or some group is not going to be feeling happy about the decision. And really what I think it comes down to for me with the that core value or that anchor is integrity. And whilst not everybody's going to agree with the decision, if they know from past experiences and observations and hopefully interactions with me, the trust will be there that I'm making the best decision at that point in time for the organization, the school, the class, the student, whatever it is. And you only get that by being, as transparent as you can, and also communicating the why behind it, and being open to hearing the feedback from people who may not necessarily have agreed with or had impact from that decision. So not just to walk away. You gotta also take that opportunity to hear at the back end. But that ultimately then I think builds the integrity, which is that core anchor ultimately that I will fall back onto every time I have to make a significant decision or decide which direction we're going to go.
One of the things that you said in the intake as well is the concept of challenge up and power down.
Mm-hmm.
Can I get you to make that real for me? So give me an example of challenging up and an example of empowering down.
Sure. So let's take the concept of Surrey School District. So we're the largest school district in the province of British Columbia by about 35,000 students. We have 85,000 kids. We have 13,000 staff and 138 schools. So the reality is we need to have a distributed leadership model within our system for us to function and to be innovative and creative. And people need to feel empowered in their local context, their school community, to be able to make the decision that's going to be best suited in that context. So if I think of empower down, I would say we're driving hard on artificial intelligence and bringing that into the discussion within the classrooms and with the schools so that our kids are not caught behind like we were with social media. But I also know that there's 138 different local communities, and how that's going to be implemented and how that conversation is going to be brought forward is going to be done at the local level by the school principal, vice principal, and ultimately the teacher in the classroom. Now, the flip side to that is, so I can set the vision saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to bring out the resources for you. Um, but I also need to be able to hear coming back up through the system, through the staff, is that if we're way off base, or if the products that we're using aren't working, or if we're not providing the right training, that folks need to be empowered to be able to say that. And that we then can take that information, adapt, and recycle again so that we hit what we need to be hitting. That's in a large scale example. I think the other way of looking at it would be, in the Surrey School District, we have 6 assistant superintendents. Each zone that they're responsible for has about 13,000 kids and 1,000 staff on average. Ultimately, they are truly, making the decisions in those zones that are going to impact their kids and the staffs that they're working with. And they need to feel empowered to be able to make those decisions and be able to ensure that the right investments are being made. And at the same point in time, come back to the executive team to say, hey, if you're thinking of doing X, this is not going to land, and here are the reasons why, and challenge back. And so it doesn't matter if it's, 50 levels between a leader, or if it's literally 2 levels or 1 level, or if it's the executive team. Folks need to be able to have that belief that, you will be empowered to do it, and you need to be able to be challenged. You can challenge on the way back up and not have a quote unquote career-ending move, right? Which is, I think, oftentimes the big fear for people, is that they don't want to challenge up because they think it might be the block, so to speak, of maybe another opportunity or a promotion or whatever, which, as much as you can in a larger organization, I try and demystify that no, we're okay. You can challenge up and you can bring those forward in conversations as long as they're respectful, as long as they're open and seeking a solution versus just tearing something down, we'll be okay.
So you stole my next 2 questions with that last statement there, because I was just about to say it's good in theory, but there is always that lingering fear of somebody that is considered lower on the hierarchical ladder, that challenging up
Yep.
will result in negative feelings towards that person, and it could hinder their ability to be successful in the future. And the reality is, in your world and in your setting, that is not the case. As long as you also said it's done respectfully and in a way that's appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is this does happen. There are places that don't allow challenging up, or it's discouraged to challenge up, or it is encouraged, but at the same time, it's not. How do we create a mindset within a leadership team that challenging up is okay?
Yeah, I think that, and I'm going to speak to all the current and future leaders here. It's actually, you have a choice. Like, you as the leader have the choice here of how you're going to interact and how you're going to build out your team. And so, how do you do that? Well, in our case, we try and model it. And if you are the leader, again, of your department, of your school, of a school district, you need to be very clear on what your expectations are, and you need to articulate it in terms of your vision, and then you need to live it. I would say I'm a history teacher, so my degree is in history. Go back and take a look at how successful all the ultimately authoritarian leaders were. They might have been able to hang on to power for a while, but eventually it crumbles, and eventually it implodes on itself. And whilst, democracy, for example, is messy, The reality is that when people feel like they have a voice, when people feel like they have input into the decisions, what you'll find is that you'll have more buy-in ultimately, and more folks who will come alongside. I think that if I go back to the future leaders and current leaders who will become district leaders, um, you learn those lessons while you're leading a school. And I guess you can take a look at the district being something different, or you can look at the district office just being a larger school. And so why would you change your philosophy as you move from one role into another? You just happen to have more staff, and you might have more public eyeballs on you. But the reality is that you can view it exactly the same, and it's just about taking that concept but applying it in a larger scale.
And the second part of my question here, Mark, is what is the respectful and appropriate way to challenge up?
Could happen in many ways. I'll give you a really direct one. I go for school visits. And it's nice to go into classrooms, and it's nice to be able to see what's happening in um, uh, the amazing work that's happening in classroom with kids and staff. But I also recognize that I'm a superintendent, and when folks have an opportunity to be able to maybe interact with me or see me, they may want to say something, and so they do. So it literally can be in the hallway of the school, or it can be in the back of a classroom of the school. And they'll let me know about the amazing things that are happening in the classrooms and also the challenges that they're having to work through. And I appreciate the fact that A, they have the courage to do it, but B, I'm not going to walk away from it, that I'll engage in it, and I'll listen to it. It's a real life example that it brings back for me as I'm sitting in the executive committees and having discussions when we're talking about budgets and the rest of it. So, it's not, I guess, so much the fact of what they're saying. It always comes down to the how. And what I've always appreciated is that the how that I've experienced has been respectful. It doesn't mean what they're saying isn't hard, and it doesn't mean that they don't have strong feelings. But, how they've said it to me is, hey, I really want you to understand this problem or this challenge or what this impact means. And here's a good example, and here's a live example for you to understand. And can't fault them for that. And I appreciate the courage that they show.
And you set the precedent when you go for visits and you walk into buildings that you need to establish that I don't just want to hear that everything's good and going great. I need to hear where you're feeling strained, drained, challenged, so that as a division, we can approach that and collaboratively work to supporting that or finding a different way forward that works best. Now, we're going to segue a bit here, Mark, and move on from some hard-hitting questions to a fun little game here called Principle or Preference, where, it reveals your actual leadership DNA. I say that as a joke, though. I'll say a statement, and you just have to tell me if this is a principle, meaning almost always true and everyone should consider it, or if it is a preference, which means it is actually something that depends on situation, and we don't care if everybody adopts that. Make sense?
Yep.
There is no time for explanations. It is rapid fire.
Okay.
Here we go. Clarity beats consensus.
Principle.
Kindness is a leadership strategy, not just a personality trait.
Principle.
If you can't explain a decision simply, it isn't ready.
Preference.
Empowerment without boundaries is abandonment.
Preference.
Transparency builds trust faster than perfection.
Principle.
Culture is shaped more by what leaders tolerate than by what they announce.
Principle.
Speed is overrated. Stability is underrated.
Preference.
When systems are stressed, communication becomes the real work.
Principle.
In hard seasons, reassurance is part of accountability.
Principle.
And leaders should be evaluated on the leaders they develop.
Preference.
Which of those do you think most leaders get wrong right now? And what does it cost their people?
I think communication, when things get really difficult, I think communication is sometimes lacking. Not because of a desire to, but because it's hard. And I think as you move higher up in leadership, there is a practical reality that when things are changing rapidly, be it things that you can control or that you can't control, people, human beings, need a place to be able to voice their displeasure, or their angst, or their anxiety, or their frustration or sadness, or whatever the emotion is. And ultimately, as you open yourself up to more communication, you're going to receive more of that angst, anger, sadness, frustration, anxiety coming back. And whilst individual people think, well, it's just me who's saying this, that literally can be times by 1,000. And for the leader or leaders who are having to make the decisions, it becomes more and more and more draining in terms of just absorbing. And I think, without having maybe gone through the experience, the natural kind of reaction would be to reduce the communication so that you don't get as much of the emotion coming back. Now, the irony is, that's actually when you need to communicate even more and recognize that people will need an outlet to be able to express those emotions, and really insulate yourself with your team. Again, this is where it goes back to you empower others so that you're not necessarily the single focal point of all of that, but it's distributed out to other folks where you can communicate the change, be able to absorb the feelings and the emotions, reassure that we're still going to be going in whatever direction you're going in, and that the system is going to be functioning in a good way. But it seems to me that's lost from when I look out at organizations that I have worked in the past, or that I just kind of see that that's sometimes a challenge that ultimately kind of trips people up in the beginning.
Because there's always that creeping thought too of, if I have to seek help on it, maybe I'm not the right person to be doing it, right? And there's that thought of judgment. So flipping the script a little bit, it makes the most sense to communicate as much as possible and be as transparent as possible. And as possible is the key word there, because it shows people that you actually care about what you're doing when you're willing to talk about what you're doing. Now, with that, Mark, I'll say that we've got a pretty good idea of your leadership DNA, but I want to rewind to where it all started. And so what I want you to do here is I want you to think of the first job that you ever had. And I'm going to take 2 minutes to try to guess what that first job was. So I'm going to try to ask simple questions. I always say yes or no, but I'm going to deviate from that. And if I ask a question that's not yes or no, I'm going to break my old rule a little bit. So do you have that first job in mind?
Yep.
All right. The game will start right now. Did you serve customers in your job?
Yes.
Did you have to wear a uniform in your job?
No.
Was it a seasonal job?
No.
Year round. Did you do it when you were in a K-12 school system?
Yes.
Okay. At what age did you have this first job?
Probably 13, 14.
13, 14. And was it an hourly pay?
No. Wasn't an hourly pay. It was a pay as quickly as you could get it done.
Okay. So it was, you were providing a service to a customer. And Were those like, was it a family business or were you working for like a corporation?
Working for an entity or a corporation.
Entity or corporation? Okay. Was it a labor intensive job?
Could be
It could be. Was it outside or inside?
outside.
Did it have to do with lawn care?
No,
Did it have to do with yard work at all?
no,
Okay. Did it have to do with one of the trades?
no.
Oh my goodness. Everyone's going to start bugging me because I'm never getting these right here, but I got to keep thinking of some questions here. Okay. Did you work with a team?
No,
You worked by yourself. You were serving people. It was outside and you did it year round. Were you a mail boy?
I was not a mail boy.
Okay, but you did something in the line of distributing things, some sort of like flyer or pamphlet distributor.
Not a flyer or pamphlet distributor,
And
but
there we go. My 2 minutes are up. I feel like I got so close at the end there. Mark,
you,
what was your first job?
I delivered the newspaper 5 days a week.
The newspaper. And I was so close with getting
You
there.
are.
I want to know, Mark, knowing that that was your first job, what did it teach you about leadership and what you use today?
Well, you know what? You had to do it every day, and it didn't matter if it was raining or snowing or super hot. It changed with the seasons. Some days it was really light. Saturdays, the papers were so heavy. Like, I'll never forget that. And you'd put this paper bag, newspaper bag over your head, over your neck to be able to kind of carry these things. And I lived in a very hilly area when I was growing up. So I had to walk, probably half a kilometer up a hill with a heavy bag before I even started my route. And, customers wanted to make sure that the papers weren't wet. They wanted it on time. And out of that, as I got older, that I had to manage it in terms of the schedule with playing after school sports and schoolwork. And so it frankly just, it taught me commitment. It taught me actually some planning. And it did teach me in a kind of a weird way some resiliency because, in the snow, in the rain, whatever it was, you had to actually go out and do it. So you figure out what's going to work for you and off you go.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know that people listening to this or listening to the short of it are going to, have to comment on this and say, how did you not get newspaper? I got it on like the third try, but there we go. I like that you mentioned the word resilience because my next segment is our air element, which talks all about the adversity we face. So let's get into headwinds and tailwinds. Mark, what's the difference between protecting the brand and hiding the truth?
So if you think of protecting the brand as, let's say, protecting public education, it's about creating the opportunities to share the positive stories within going on in public education and the value that it brings in terms of bringing society together, teaching kids the beauty of diversity, teaching students the beauty of learning collaboratively, and so on and so forth. When you think of protecting that brand, the brand of public education, for example, is what happens daily, but it might not necessarily be good behavior that's happening at a board level. And so you have to be able to distinguish that and help the public be able to distinguish what's happening in a political realm versus what's happening every day in a classroom environment. And from a transparency perspective, there is and will always be narratives of schools or public education that are positive or not. I think when you're in a leadership role, it is kind of part of our duty to be able to celebrate what goes on in public education. and acknowledge that it can be better, right? We can always do better for our kids. But there are also some things that you actually just can't share. So if I think of it from the perspective of public education, education itself is a human-centered um, experiment. And humans sometimes don't always make the best decisions, and they don't always make wise choices. And sometimes the humans in our systems are students, but sometimes also the decisions or choices that are made in our system are made by adults, and they're not wise choices either. And so, while the public may want to know what is the outcome of, let's say, a personnel decision, well, there's also privacy, and you can't be transparent about what has happened, nor necessarily what the outcome is. And so you balance reassuring and showing the positive side of public education, acknowledging in that sense. So that's like protecting the brand, acknowledging it's a human enterprise. Mistakes are made. We take them seriously. And obviously we have our processes, but I can't tell you exactly what goes on because there are some expectations of privacy. And there's always going to be a tension there and a balance, right? That you have to work through.
So, with that, what do you say to staff who feel the outside narrative is swallowing their work?
Well, first off, I think when you're in a senior role, you have to be Mr. or Mrs. or Miss or Mr. Positive all the time. And we do have opportunities in leadership roles to be able to share the positive stories that are going on and to be able to go out into the public and describe the amazing things that are going on to schools and reflect back that story. I think today with social media, with opportunities like podcasts, for example, to share stories, leaders really need to actually embrace it to be able to I don't want to say counter those narratives, but provide the opportunity for folks to actually hear a different perspective in different mediums, in different forms. And I would say to the individual teacher or EA or custodial person or office staff or principal or vice principal, you know what? I see you and you're doing amazing work. And not everybody else can see it. But I know that what I just saw in your classroom where you were working with a student who was struggling with math, you're having impact. And that's not going to be necessarily published on the front page of the Calgary Herald or the Vancouver Sun. But words of affirmation for staff quietly when it's observed and without fanfare, but it's told to them, it means a lot. And it helps change the narrative that keeps on blowing from the outside because they know they're valued and they know that they're seen.
It's well said. You humanize the role and the task at hand, and it's good to hear that perspective from a leader as well. Mark, you said that a hill you're willing to die on is to not make decisions in a vacuum, to step out of the tyranny of the urgent and look at the big picture.
Yep.
Teach that as a tool. So if I'm a leader and my day is on fire, what is this actual method?
Okay, so I maybe need to give one little caveat. If your school literally is on fire, you can make a decision in the vacuum and get everybody out, right?
That's right.
But in education, there is always a moment to take a step back and pause. And there's always a moment for any leader to phone a critical friend and run past the whatever it is, challenge or issue that you're working through. When you're dealing with human beings, especially young people, we have to remember that school is their safe place to explore the world. And while they may make decisions or choices that in the moment drive us crazy, we also have to remember the impact of the decision and how we make that decision can actually have more impact than whatever they chose to try or do or the mistake that they made. And so that space of slowing down and actually seeing the bigger picture and taking a moment to find some strategy of how you're going to work through this. And I think also looking forward to, well, what's the next step and the next step? So once I make this decision, then what? Then what? That is a skill that can be practiced. And you can practice that as a brand new vice principal or a brand new classroom teacher, or you can practice that skill as a very seasoned superintendent. And, again, that goes back to that initial space where it's about, you empower your people that you work with to be able to provide that sage and thoughtful perspective for you to consider, either by you going to ask or them knowing, and this is key, that they can come to you and say, Tyler, you need to slow down on this one. This is something maybe you want to consider. And if you get to that space with your team where it's like this, then that concept, that experience is going to propel you in terms of being a leader, which will, going back to the space before that you asked me, how do you empower down and challenge up? Right there, that message will get out to everybody to see it.
I hear that, and I appreciate the breakdown of it. It's definitely something that I'll take away from it into my own role, and I hope it's something that people listening take into their own role as well. And with that, you said it's a skill we can practice. Well, we're going to model that and practice it right now. I'm going to put you into the hot seat here, Mark. And so I'm going to give you a scenario that's happened. And in 10 seconds or less, I want your first move that you would take.
Okay.
So someone challenges your leadership publicly. What's your first move?
I'd ask them to explain a little bit more. Tell me what the concern is.
Team morale hits rock bottom. What's your first move?
I'd want to understand why and bring people together to be able to hear it directly from them in terms of what the issues are.
You realize a goal you set was the wrong goal. What do?
Acknowledge it and start moving towards the right one.
You're given contradictory directives from above. How would you handle it?
I'd ask for clarity.
And you lose momentum mid-project. What's your first move?
My first move would be to bring the team back together and see where how we've lost momentum, and then how do we get going.
I appreciate that 4 out of those 5, your answer was to gather more information first and to seek a little bit of clarity. Because what happens when leaders are faced with a decision or scenario right away is they want to jump to the answer or the solution because they think that the quick fix is going to make everything better. But sometimes the quick fix causes more problems. And so it's good to hear the seek to understand. And the only one that wasn't a seek to understand was the acknowledging that your goal was wrong in the first place, which is the right move for a leader to do as well. What is a value that drives most of those first moves for you?
Trust. I trust the people that I work with. I will often say, Tyler, that I am the least intelligent in the room. And I genuinely mean that. If anybody was going to ask me one piece of advice, it's you surround yourself with smart people, get out of their way. So with that philosophy, I trust that they will tell me what I need to hear, even if it's contradictory to what I think. I trust that they have the organization's best interests at heart. I also trust that they have my best interests at heart. And so they will be honest with me if we're going down a wrong direction, or they'll be honest with me if I'm going too fast or if people need a push. And I think that the only way, again, to earn that is to trust them and trust their decisions. And if it's a decision that maybe you wouldn't have made, or maybe it's a decision that had an outcome that did create a little bit of waves, then it's not a punishment. It's a learning experience and a message of, and I still have full confidence in you. Like, don't second guess yourself. Keep going.
And Mark, we're going to jump right from one game into another game here. This game is called Flip the Script. So I'm
Okay.
going to give you a common leadership belief, and I need you to rewrite the narrative into something you would actually teach about it. Make sense?
Okay. Yep.
Okay, so quitting means you failed.
Failing means that you're learning, and quitting means you're giving up. Whereas if you stick in it, you're going to learn more.
Leaders can't show doubt.
Authentic leaders show their humbleness and humility and a willingness to be able to ask for help.
Playfulness is unprofessional.
Being real allows people to trust.
You need permission to reinvent yourself.
We ask kids to reinvent themselves every day. Why do we stop as adults?
And if it's scary, you're not ready.
Everything we do is a first. It's always scary. That's how we grow.
You know, one of the things you said is surround yourself with smart people, and you refer to yourself as maybe not the smartest person. One of the things that has stuck with me, that somebody that I interviewed has said, is the smartest person in the room is the person that asks the most questions. And by listening to you here, seeking to understand, challenging those thought processes, I just want you to know, from my perspective, I do think you're very smart, and you do ask by asking the right questions. You're putting people that are also very smart in those positions to collaboratively respond to that. And through that, through our Earth conversation, our air conversation, we've actually talked a lot about how we would implement a change and we would take that collaborative response. And so coming into this conversation, I normally have an Earth, air, water, fire segment, but I actually chose not to do our water segment today because we've talked about it here and I knew it would come out in these, that I want to jump into our fire element. And so let's get into Spark or Burn. Mark, what was a bold decision you made where you knew there was a real risk, but you did it anyway?
Yeah, we're right in the midst of piloting hybrid learning in Surrey for grade 10, 11, and grade 12 students. I think all of us still have memories and probably some trauma from COVID. But, we wanted to take a look at this from the perspective of this is actually right for kids. They need experience with online coursework. They need experience being able to do this, frankly speaking. And what better place to do that than in a school setting where it's still safe? And so we have taken that pilot in Surrey, certainly with lots of questions and angst from members of our public. I think having that fear of what COVID was and the COVID school experience was. But at the same point in time, helping a board of education also take a look at what's right for kids and try that. And so super proud of the team. We've implemented this at across every secondary school. We're expanding it for next year with more options for kids. Still completely optional, so we're not forcing any students in. But also, again, the courage of teachers to step back in, and a board of education to take that risk, but also recognize it's something to try. So, the risk on that is going back to questioning of public education. The reward on that is having our kids leave our system with another set of skills and competencies that they're going to use immediately if they go to post-secondary, or if they're in the work environment where it's going to be partially online and partially in person. And so we're trying that, and we're experiencing that, and hearing feedback from both students, staff, and parents, both positive, and with questions and concerns, and then adapting and trying again and moving forward.
Now, this is something, it is a big shift in how we would view education. And there's a way to explain this that, we talked about on the intake form called the grandma test. And so
Yep.
I would love it if I was your student here, or a parent or a colleague to you, to explain what this grandma test is, but then teach this to me in this scenario as if you were applying that.
Well, the grandma test is being able to, articulate something or explain something to, your grandma. And really what that means is you make sure that it's direct and it's pretty straightforward as to the why. So if I was going to explain this to you today, I would say, okay, we're going to try this, Tyler, because you can go to any post-secondary institution today and you're going to take at least one course online. And I don't want your daughter to experience her first online course in an environment that will be brand new, where she's possibly living on her own and experiencing all those things as a young adult. I want that experience to occur in a safe space that's controlled, where she can also be able to explore and try things that will be easier for her to be able to navigate than doing it on her own. So it's trying to take a complex issue, break it down like you're literally going to explain it to your grandma, who may or may not be tech savvy and online, and be able to articulate it in, frankly, less than hopefully a minute and a half in terms of the why.
And I think what's so important about that too is you're also in public education, that parent's not paying thousands of dollars to take on that big risk of something for the first time. When I can't say it was my first teaching job, because my first one was at a Hutterite colony, but my second teaching job, I did all of my tests online, and it was unheard of at that moment. Why can't they do a paper test? Why can't it be a paper test? Give them, we want paper copies. And my response was, when I was in university, all of my tests were online. And if you're planning to go there one day, you need to know what it's like before you actually get there, because you don't want that first one to be overwhelming. So creating that space and communicating it that way was very effective. And by the end of my first year, my kids loved that I was doing online tests, and it just became the norm. And I mean, we look at where at least the province of Alberta is now, and PATs and diploma exams are starting to move to online testing. And so it's nice to see the trend in which we move towards, is that advancement of what is the life skill or the next step that they need, right? That's that step ahead. So you recognized that you can do online classes in post-secondary. We need to practice an online class in K-12 systems. So a great way to explain it. The template, right, would be, grandma, we're doing this because blank. We're not doing blank.
Right.
Well, we'll know it's working when blank. So if people want this, at the end of every episode, the week of we publish, I put out a free resource. The free resource coming out this week is going to have some templates for the grandma test for you to help and play around with and work yourself through as well. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And Mark, we're going to jump into our last elemental game here. We're going to get into final answer. So I'm going to give you a this or that scenario, and you just have to pick which one, with no opportunity to rationalize or defend your choice. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So empowerment or control?
Empowerment.
Empowerment or clarity?
Clarity.
Clarity or kindness?
Clarity.
Clarity or courage?
Courage.
Courage or consistency?
Consistency.
Consistency or speed?
Consistency.
Consistency or equity?
Ooh. Consistency.
Consistency or innovation?
Innovation.
Innovation or trust?
Innovation.
Innovation or legacy?
Innovation.
There we go. Thank you for playing. I have to ask, when I asked you between consistency and equity, you
Yep.
hesitated for a sec. Why was there a hesitation?
Because I wouldn't separate. Equity is core to everything. So it's core to me when it comes to innovation. It's core when it comes to consistency. Like that was a maybe a core value that I don't distinct. They're not distinct to me. Um, and so that was tough because it's like, I haven't articulated that in this context, but when I just think of equity, you look across the entire system, that is something that is literally just core to the bone. Like if you think of equity in innovation, you should be innovating so that all students, regardless of their abilities, are going to have the opportunity to experience whatever it is that you're innovated for, right? And it may be that your innovation is going to be more beneficial for a smaller number of students, but that actually brings the equity of the opportunity up for them with the rest of the students who already have that opportunity. So hard to separate that out, and it
Mhm.
did certainly give me pause when
Yeah.
you said that.
Mark, if someone only remembered one sentence from this conversation, what would you want it to be?
Um, I think as a leader, you have a choice. You have a choice of how you're going to lead. And the easy way is to control. The harder way is to distribute. The more powerful way is if you distribute. The less effective way is if you control. You have the choice.
Alchemists, if you're still with us, I have a little micro action. This is new to our site, to our show. I haven't done this before, but I wanted to end this one by just giving some advice over the next 48 hours. Pick a decision that you're avoiding or that's coming up. Step out of that tyranny of the urgent for 10 minutes. Run it through your grandma test. Then write one sentence that you can stand behind. Let's see how that goes. I'd love to hear from you, Tyler at elementaleducator.com, what decision that was and how this went for you. Mark, the last thing that we do on the show here is my last guest leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing who they are, what their experience is, or what they bring to the table. The
Okay.
question left for you is what did you want to be when you were 6 years old, when you grew up?
I can tell you it wasn't a superintendent, but when I was 6 years old, I think it probably was like a fire person or a police officer. Yeah, it wasn't where I've ended up today.
Did you ever come close to it?
Yeah, because in the end, when I think back, a fire person or a police officer they serve people. Public education is about service.
Yeah.
And so I do feel like I serve, it's just in a different way. But they do life threatening stuff in education. I think we do life altering leadership. So that's a pretty cool way to look at it.
That absolutely is. My when I moved to where I am now in Lloydminster, I was teaching science in grade 9, and at the same time, somebody that I met as a colleague that was also a teacher was a volunteer firefighter. So I actually got into volunteer firefighting as well. And my first call was to the petting zoo in Lloydminster, and so not saving the lives of people, but sometimes just saving the lives of animals as well. Mark, what question would you like to leave my next guest, not knowing who they are or what we're going to be talking about?
I think I would ask the question, when you think back, what was that moment that pushed you forward to in your first step of leadership? And if you could do it again, would you take a bigger leap?
There we go. I'll make sure that the next guest gets that question. Mark, I just wanted to take one last minute here and say thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join me on the show. I know that I've pulled meaning from this conversation. I know that the listeners will pull meaning from this conversation. And again, just thank you for your time and all the wisdom you shared today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and thanks to all the leaders out there, and continue learning. That's what we do best.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of the show. If you have feedback, a suggestion, or just want to start a conversation, fire off an email to me, tyler@elementaleducator.com. I actually read them. And if this episode sparks something, leave a review on Apple or Spotify. It helps more leaders find the show. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, where I put out additional content. I'll see you next time, same same place.